Hello and welcome to The Green Room by Deloitte, an award-winning podcast where we explore the topics that matter most in business. I'm Annie Wong and this is episode 70 where we ask, how do we close the funding gap?
If you look at venture capital funding that goes to all female-founded teams, that is currently sitting at 2%.
On average, and we're talking a lot of averages, it takes longer for a female-led business to access the funding.
You can't be what you can't see, right? So if you don't know that this is a career path for you because you do not see anyone that is doing that, then it's really difficult to take that leap forward.
It's fundamental to grow the business of our future, to grow the unicorns of our future, and therefore that's why we're so passionate about it.
Hello everyone and welcome back to The Green Room. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm on the sofa today with Ethan for 2 episodes in a row. How are you doing, Ethan?
Yeah, good. I feel like we're becoming the dream team.
Yeah.
It feels just like yesterday that we had our episode on sustainability in music festivals.
Yes, that's right. Our latest ep was all about will music festivals ever be sustainable? So if you haven't had a chance to listen, please do go and check it out. I thought it was a really insightful conversation. Spoke a lot about challenges and barriers, but I also felt quite optimistic about what the future might hold for sustainability when it comes to live events and the music industry. And you can find all of that and all of our other episodes wherever you get your pods. Today, we're talking all about funding. We've all got ideas, but getting someone to back your ideas isn't always easy. And if you're a female founder in particular, it's even more difficult. And if you look at other underrepresented groups and intersections, it can be even more difficult, whether it be black female business owners, people with disabilities, etc. So our question of today is, how do we close the funding gap? And as always, we can't possibly discuss this and get to the bottom of this alone. So we've got 2 wonderful guests with us. Who have we got, Ethan?
We have got Sophie Winwood, co-founder and CEO of Women in Venture Capital Europe. Thank you for joining us, Sophie.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we're also joined by Jodie Burkitt, Deloitte UK's managing partner for the technology, media and telco industry. Hi, Jodie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. And I think just to start by setting the scene, Annie's kind of trailed it, but how would you guys define the funding gap when we look at female investors getting this funding?
I will look at this specifically from the venture capital industry. So the venture capital industry is responsible for funding innovative new projects and startups that have an outsized impact on the way that we interact with products, the companies that we work with, and the innovation that kind of pushes the economy forward. So if you think about the largest companies in, say, the FTSE or the S&P today, a large proportion of the highest growing companies are all venture-backed companies. So while you might not have heard of venture capital as an industry, it is really important in kind of the future. And the stats, unfortunately, are relatively depressing. So if you look at venture capital funding that goes to all female-founded teams, that is currently sitting at 2%. Wow. Now you might think, okay, but hopefully we're on an upward trajectory. Maybe it started at 0.5 and now we're at 2 and that's a great growth. That is not true. It's actually been sitting pretty stale at 2% for the last 5 years, and it's even dipped in recent years to be a little bit lower. And so if you think about the projects that are being started by women, when we know there are a lot of women that are starting things, they are just not getting the capital to then go on and grow and scale these businesses. And the impact that would have, there was a report, it was called the Rose Review, that was done in the UK. If women started and scaled businesses at the same rate as men, it would add 250 billion to GDP. This is not only we're doing this the right thing for equality, we should be doing better because it would, it's going to add a huge amount of value.
I also had the same train of thought and thinking, well, if we are on a trajectory, but 2% is absolutely breathtakingly low and inexcusably so. And Alison's, I think, review was in 2018. Yeah. And really, as you said, the dial hasn't shifted in all of that time.
There is a funding gap across every single area as a woman to starting, scaling, building your business, and it's just not got better.
And if you think about it, if it's 2% at the inception of a business, at the time when a business is its most financially vulnerable, it hasn't got the benefit of an earnings history to fund its growth. It's got an idea that needs to originate and needs to be able to invest in both resources, cash resources and people resources. It does not have the financial stability to do that, cannot get access to funding, then it will flow all the way through the chain because those businesses won't exist further down the line, because you won't have as many female-led entrepreneurial businesses that are getting funding at the start, and therefore they can't grow into the businesses that need the next round of funding.
Yeah, and you think that might be just female only, but mixed teams do way better. But I had a look, and I think male-only teams are 24%, maybe even higher, which feels like...
It's actually, in venture, it's women-only teams is 2%, mixed teams is 16%.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
So male only is 80%?
84%.
Oh,
Yeah, more.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because it feels really disproportionate. So if you think about the number of female-led businesses being founded, it's growing at a rate of knots. It's growing exponentially compared to male-led, and it is therefore not a lack of businesses. And also you're likely to find more mixed teams, and that the women like to... we did talk about making sweeping generalisations in the context of this cast, so bear with me, but women quite like that collaboration piece and founding as a mixed team, and therefore the fact that only 16% of funding is going to mixed teams is astonishing.
In terms of why the funding gap exists and all, the myriad reasons of things that are playing into this, is there any evidence that of the businesses that are female founded aren't getting the same strong financial returns as other businesses? Because obviously investors are looking for strong financial returns. I would argue that there isn't, but I don't know. Is there? Is there any difference? Could that be part of the reason why, or is it all down to things like biases, investors not seeing the value of these businesses for whatever reason?
So there is quite a lot of data that says that female founders outperform male founders in terms of returns. That data has been out there for quite a long time. And unfortunately, that if we know that is true and that has been proven, and the data is still as bad as it is, then unfortunately we have to then look at ourselves as an industry and say, okay, well, why are we doing this? There's so much data, and I think Deloitte are fantastic at this, about diverse teams drive better companies. That is just, I think that's an immutable fact now. And if you have a female leader in the business, they're more likely to hire a diverse team. And then there's just the fact that there is, you having a more diverse view, you're having different responses to different industries and building different products, that as an industry that is focused on diversification and diversification driving returns such as venture, it is mad to think that just investing in the same type of founder is going to drive outside returns. So it doesn't make sense when you look at everything and the data, which unfortunately means that we have an issue with the industry and how they look at female founders.
Just what exacerbates that is we know that venture funding in the first quarter of this year was 20% down on last year, so that people are struggling to find the businesses they want to invest in, and yet there is a whole cohort of businesses that are being completely ignored by the industry. And that just demonstrates, I think, the problems I'm sure we're going to come and talk as to why they might exist. But it's people are looking for new businesses to invest in, and they're just not looking in the right places.
And you've both mentioned kind of there's lots of female-led businesses. It's not kind of, it's more of a demand issue than well, not really demand issue, but it's more of a kind of a funding. They're not getting the funding rather than there not being a supply. Are there any barriers to the supply side? So, for whatever reason, women feeling less empowered to start their own business, or being not kind of mentored into that career path, or is there any kind of factors in that side?
Yeah, I think we shouldn't go into the systemic factors, because one, they get me really sad, but two, I think we all know about less women going into STEM and the education and all of that stuff. So I think if we leave that aside, one of the stats that I keep coming back to, which is really interesting, which is they did a recent survey, people across the country, can you name a female CEO? And 80% of people couldn't name a female CEO, and that is really bad. You can't be what you can't see, right? So if you don't know that this is a career path for you because you do not see anyone that is doing that, then it's really difficult to take that leap forward and say, okay, I will start my own business. And it's the same with your circle of friends. If you know that a lot of your men will have a lot of their friends who may have started or joined venture-backed companies and have seen that path, that is just less so for women. And so I think there is a little bit of barrier around understanding it is even a choice, and then being in the networks where that can accelerate your path to starting a business. But that barrier is coming down.
I think we need to pursue all avenues, but let's say that there are fewer role models. That's an incredible stat in terms of people's ability to recognise a female CEO or to name one. But we could have that debate if we're at, say, 30% of funding, okay, so how can we get that to more towards parity? We're at 2%. So there is no conceivable way in which there are not enough businesses for that number to exponentially increase.
Your stat about that stat that always shocked me, which I think might have changed now, but that idea that there's more CEOs named John than there are women on the FTSE 100 always blows my mind.
There's so many of those stats as well. It's just like
But if we were just to digress a moment into boards, because clearly there are some parallels there in terms of within corporate governance, and there's been a lot of upward pressure in terms of trying to drive diversity on boards. That has been very successful on the non-exec side, and less growth and improvement, but less successful on the executive side, and that's because of the access to talent, the access to the right resources. And it might be to apply that lens to here that we might need to focus on more of those mixed teams in terms of female and male-led teams. That might be an easier route to improve the percentage of funding. And then when people have more access to seeing those female role models in those places as well as male role models, then you might get the flywheel effect.
Before we dig into how we fix the problem and what we can do, I'd like to probe a little bit more into the benefits of closing the gap and why it's so important that we do that. So we spoke a lot about the benefits of diverse teams and better returns, etc. What about for the investors and for society and kind of broader impacts as well?
Yeah, and I guess one thing that I think we haven't touched on, which is really important to me and why I started WVCE, is when we look at the issue that is at hand and we talk about, maybe women aren't starting businesses the same rate as when, women aren't being funded businesses the same rate as when, is because unfortunately the venture capital industry has a diversity issue, and only 16% of partners and general partners are women within the industry, and 2% women are 2 times more likely to invest in female founders. So you can see how actually an unlock on that side could be a huge unlock on the female founders side. And so that's something that my organisation focuses on, is how do we create the network, the platform and the tools to get women into these decision-making roles so that capital will flow down to female founders. And so how I look at this, kind of the benefits, is twofold. One is on the investor side in terms of returns. So I know we spoke a lot about how diverse teams, diverse companies, diverse portfolio drive returns. And so as an industry, I believe that we will be better off if we have a more diversified view of what good looks like, and we fund businesses that are funded by female, diverse, intersectional founders. The second is the population is not all white men. And the idea that the biggest companies today have been started, scaled, and are predominantly run by white men mean that we are all buying products that have been designed with one user in mind. And that has led to a lot of issues, in terms of some of the products we use, especially in the medical industry. So I think having that holistic view is really, really important. And the third is I think really we need to rethink culture and structure of companies. And we need to build it with a diverse lens, because people are going to have to take time off and have children or build families or go off and have other, hobbies or access to other opportunities. And that is just better represented when you have a more diverse leadership in place. So really what's kind of depressing but also exciting is if we unlock this, we have better financial returns, we have better companies, and we have better products. And that is such a exciting opportunity that I'm why isn't everyone doing more of this?
Historically, women's confidence in making financial investments has been measured as significantly lower than men's. Historically, they have not had the wealth at their disposal, but they're benefiting from their own wealth generation and creation. They're benefiting from inheritance, and we're going to see more and more of our spending power in the hands of women.
So do you feel more optimistic that 2% figure will start to shift as a result of that?
I feel optimistic that it will shift as a result of that, but I think it will take some regulatory intervention that will need to happen quite quickly to really shift the dial quickly.
You, Sophie, have been on both sides, right? You've been on the kind of, you spoke about the decision makers and also the founders. You've kind of operated in both spaces. What's kind of like your personal experience of being in both rooms?
Yeah, I guess from the outset, I haven't raised venture funding, and I take my hat off to anyone, male or female, or anyone who does it, because it is really rough. But what I have seen that through, I'm very fortunate that I work with a female partner, a woman called Ruth Fox-Blader, who is incredible, and she has been my champion, my mentor, my friend, and gave me a lot of decision-making power quite early, and we invest in quite a lot of female founders. They are outperforming, they're like the top performing companies of our portfolio at the moment, which is really awesome. But I've seen the struggle that they have been through, even when I know they're building a fantastic business, they have the traction, because as an investor, you have this interesting lens where you know, our total portfolio is now 40 companies. We see a lot of them go out to fundraise at the same time, and you can see, one, the time that it takes, two, the questions and the requests that comes back, and then three, unfortunately, sometimes outright discrimination. When questions were asked to male funders, it's all about how big can this business be? What is the potential? What are your growth plans? And for female founders, it was, how are you de-risking the business? What are your biggest risks? So there is actually also a different mentality that is put onto female founders and male founders. And that's why I think I'm really passionate about building up a female and diverse investor base, because then you do just have a different lens. And actually maybe female investors might unconsciously bias female founders. And that, you know, unfortunately, it's unconscious bias, but you know, as Jodie said, all of these things are really important, but something big needs to change, because we've known about all this stuff forever. But, you know, what is that unlock where we jump from 2 to 10 to 30 to, you know, one day hopefully 50?
And the data and the success of female founded and led businesses is there.
Yep.
Just why aren't more people seeing that and really acknowledging that value? Jodie, you've worked with so many businesses. In your experience, like, are you seeing some of the things that Sophia said as well play out in the businesses that you've worked with?
In terms of the unconscious bias, how people treat female founders versus male founders, yes, because I would predominantly see male-founded businesses, not exclusively at all. I've been working in M&A for 25 years, so absolutely not exclusively, but a really high proportion would be. And I will echo, in terms of a decision-making within private equity, within venture capital, is largely at the hand of males. Now that is absolutely not ubiquitously true, and there are some amazing females working in that environment, and also working in an environment in a way to make it work for female teams. Because if you have a female who's going to that environment and behaving like a male to fit in, and we're making sweeping generalizations again, then that isn't going to change the dial. You know, her voice cannot be the lone voice that is campaigning for an investment into a female-led business and facing a wall of not wanting to do that, not accepting that. So it does need to change, I think, across all of, you know, male and female investors. I think it's incumbent on everybody.
And what are some of the things that Deloitte is doing to help kind of close the funding gap?
That's quite a big question, isn't it? It's a big mission that we would take on. So one example would be our Fast 50 program, and which has been running for a very long time, is well known in the early funding stage of the market, is a really well represented event. And over the last couple of years, we have first of all introduced an award for female founders. It does also extend into mixed founder teams to make sure that we are giving it an adequate population. And the second thing we did was ensuring that within that room we had a really strong representation of females. And because we absolutely love a statistic, once you hit 30%, that is the kind of magic percentage in terms of the proportion of females in the room, then it drives a really different dynamic. It's at that point that it starts to feel more like parity. Yeah, I mean, that's just one small example. And living by the values that we're talking about, helping, mentorship is a really exciting opportunity for us. We've got a lot of people in our organisation who have got a lot of value to bring to people in the early stages of their business, and just providing that mentorship, because we haven't really talked about that as one of the benefits that comes alongside the funding. As well as having the funding, you have somebody there who, as you talked about, the person you work with, provide invaluable advice through that journey.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's not just about getting the money, it's about all those wider benefits as well.
Yeah, this becomes a virtuous cycle,
or a vicious
one.
cycle, which just seems to have been what happened. And how about Women in Venture Capital Europe? What are some of the things, I think you've spoken a bit about the kind of networking that you're doing there, but is there anything else that, well, there's lots you're doing, but anything else you want to talk about here on that?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So the network and community is a really interesting one, because men almost have this sort of inbuilt network from kind of historical experiences, whereas we believe that networks are so important, right? The networks that you're in produce opportunities, produce people to meet, role models, and we have taken that upon ourselves to supercharge, and was like, we're just going to build that from this ground up. We're going to get as many female investors as we can involved all across Europe. And actually it just means you can find your co-investor, you can ask the question that you maybe didn't want to ask in your own company, and you can just get things done very efficiently and meet up with people. The second thing is around this role model piece. So we have a summit in Paris in October, and we actually put on the first Women in Venture Capital Summit in Europe, and we have awesome female investors, operators, founders. And after the first event we did in 2022, someone messaged me and said, thank you for this. I've never felt part of the industry until now, when I'm surrounded by people that I know and I feel like I trust. And so that's a big thing, is creating an industry that people feel part of. And then the third is, if you think about kind of the whole stack of investment, is we are trying to rethink what venture capital looks like. And we are very focused on women in current funds and then making that partner role, but we're also really excited about the women who are jumping out and starting their own funds, because then you are really building female first. Some of them are only focused on female founders, some of them aren't, but they will build with a more of a gender lens and will start to prove out some of these metrics that we're all talking about, that I think it becomes a lot more real when you're seeing it. So that's really exciting. And then the last one in terms of this new investor base is angel investors, which again is a very low stat. It's not as low as 2%, it's 13% of angel investors are women. But there are a lot of women who have this wealth that you were talking about, Jodie, in terms of the transfer of wealth, that don't know about angel investing, don't know it exists, don't know how to do it. And it's one of the things that we want to take on, is if we can educate that actually, you can invest in things that you're interested in, you can invest from up to £1,000, and you can invest along a cohort of women or like-minded people through a syndicate, then I think that also could be a really interesting way to sort of, unlock capital flowing to female founders.
Did you know at Deloitte we support social enterprises through our 5 Million Futures programme? One of my favourites is Luminary Bakery in London. They use baking as a tool to take women on a journey to employability and entrepreneurship, equipping them with transferable skills for the working world. Their letterbox brownies are incredible, and they even have a cookbook. If you fancy a taste, just head to luminarybakery.com. Now back to our topic of the day.
So you mentioned things like regulation, mentorship, the great things that your organisation, Sophie, is doing. Do you think there's also, when it comes to that financial education piece you were saying about, individuals not knowing about angel investors, etc., do you think there's a role for governments to provide that financial education in a more accessible way?
I think there's a lot that the government can be doing around this space. Education is a fantastic way to start, and it feels like a quick win just in terms of any financial education. It doesn't need to be specifically to do with female founders or is an important part of growing up and of being able to build wealth. And so just having a better view of what that looks like and promoting it as well as a positive thing. There's also, the thing is, the government have these really great tax breaks to do with investing. and then they just don't seem to put the firepower behind it so that people understand it and are motivated to do it. The other thing that the government have sort of half started, but I think could do a little bit of oomph, is the Investing in Women's Code. If you're a fund and you sign up to the Investing in Women's Code, you have a certain amount of criteria that is put on you, which is a significant amount of reporting, have a diversity champion, and then some metrics around investing in diverse founders. And that's been running for a couple of years, and as we talked about, stats haven't changed, so it's more of a carrot, like sign up to this, put it on your website. Whereas I think we probably need to start, having some proper, more stick-related policies, or being a bit more strong. And I think the women on boards is a really good example. I think quotas is always going to be a difficult topic. A lot of people don't sort of agree with it, don't like tokenization, but something has to change. And when you get more women funded, or you get more women on boards, and then women see they're on boards and the start to shift, it just creates this flywheel effect. And so it just feels like the government has to be a little bit stronger, but I can understand why you don't want to upset people, and you want to make sure that the industry is happy because it's a really important ecosystem. So I think it's a tricky spot.
And it's constantly battling, attracting funding into the UK as a whole to fuel our growth, and therefore anything that might put a barrier, where somebody might see that another European country might be more attractive than to invest here. But the code, people sign up to it, but I think the clue is in the title, it is voluntary in terms of signing up to it. And in terms of holding funds to account against that code is relatively low in terms of, it doesn't have teeth in terms of its ability to impact how the fund performs. The tokenism point, it wouldn't work if that was the case, because the fund would not make the returns they need to make, and therefore they wouldn't get any more funding, and therefore it would be a slow, quite a quick maybe death of that fund. That is just going to have to be looking at businesses through a different lens. And we've already talked about the fact that female-led businesses do perform, so therefore we don't think it will impact the returns model, but it's just a change in the decision making.
Some female businesses will be bad, and that's okay, that's the model. And I think this idea that every female founded business has to be this incredible, we've got to have the best female founder with the best business ever. It's like, well, obviously we only want to invest in the best businesses. We only want to invest in businesses that we believe will build billion-dollar, category creating businesses. But we can't have this dual lens on, we will only invest in women if it's the best thing I've ever seen in my whole life. All we want is to be as average as men.
It just perpetuates the problem, doesn't it? Because on the topic of quotas and targets and things, I completely agree. You need the carrot and the stick. The problem that I find is that it's all well and good, absolutely step number one is getting more women and underrepresented women through the door. But if they're not then in an environment where they can thrive, and the actual environment isn't inclusive, it becomes counterproductive. So I feel like there's the regulation and everything that needs to be done, but then how do we also make sure that when we've done all of this great work and the percentage has gone up, that those female-led businesses are thriving and feel included and feel like that is the industry that they belong in, and not that they've just been there just to meet that quota,
100%. Yeah.
But I feel like that's why it would work, because if you've invested in that business, that's the whole point of investing, that your goals are aligned, and therefore investing in a business to set it up to fail that's not going to happen, because that would be a very short-lived investment. And we know that early stage funding, the returns are driven off a small percentage of the businesses, because as you say, some of them will fail across the portfolio, and that will happen. But I don't think it would be, we're going to make sure that, we'll fill the quota by the ones that fail being the female-led, and the ones that thrive are the male-led businesses, because they wouldn't get enough in the male-led businesses to be able to maintain the returns.
As well as the stick element, it sounds like the carrot element isn't that concrete either, is that right, with the regulation at the moment? Are there things like tax breaks offered and those kind of things, or is it more exposure? And
there's nothing specifically around I think it's a branding and reputational thing, signing up to these codes, and I think that is the thing that I really struggle with in the venture capital industry is there is a lot of talk. There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of people saying they're focused on this. But obviously it's not translating into data. So it's all well and good someone going on and talking about how they care and they've hired loads of female investors. But if we're not seeing it in the numbers, then they're obviously not caring enough. And so it's hard because venture is all about reputation and who you know. And I think that's the way the carrot does work. And everyone is trying to attract the best businesses, male or female, but it's not. There's nothing like really going to move the needle at the moment in terms of carrot.
I think the reason why I find it so frustrating is venture capital is such an important part of the funding cycle. So it's a little bit of bashing from us going on in terms of the investors into the venture capital investors. It's fundamental to grow the business of our future, to grow the unicorns of our future, and therefore that's why we're so passionate about it. Not because we don't think there should be funding male-led businesses, we just think that the range of businesses they're investing in should increase.
So Sophie, you mentioned the actual process of getting funding and how difficult it could be. Is there anything that you think could be changed about the process that would make it so much more accessible and easier for women and underrepresented groups to actually get through that process?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. There isn't really a standardized diligence process within venture. Every fund does different things, indexes on different strengths. But I think if funds apply the same process to all founders regardless, and they're collecting actual data, so they're able to reflect, because I think, venture is a lot gut-based. It's a lot about feel, especially when you're investing in early stage companies. There's no metrics. The only thing you know about their financial model is it's wrong. And you really have to believe that that founder is going to build this huge business and scale a huge team. And if you're going off gut and you have unconscious bias, then that may lead to this perpetuation of these decision makings going one way. But if we had a bit more of a standardized process, if data was collected, and if the decision making was, a more diverse group, that even if a male or non-diverse team did all of the work, but then had to present it to an investment committee that was diverse, then you're getting multiple eyes, you're getting multiple reflections, and then you'll be able to make a decision that is less biased. And I guess from my advice to a founder's point of view is that, challenge the fund to introduce you to more people in the team and make sure that it's not just one investor that is doing everything. It's great, you need one investor, you need a champion, but make sure that you're meeting the partners who are going to be making that decision in advance, and try and make it in person as well, because I think we're losing a little bit of that in venture. But I think if you're starting a business and you believe in what you're doing, get in front of them in person and try and kind of to convince them on the business but also on yourself.
Thinking about the future and trying to be optimistic and hopeful about shifting that 2% and what that could look like, what do you think the future of funding could look like in the next 5, 10, 20 years as more women have more wealth and power and hopefully more access and education and empowerment, etc.? What do you think it looks like? Or what could it look like?
I think it could look like it's commonplace for a female-led business to walk into the room for its funding as a male-led business to walk into the room for its funding and to walk out of the room with funding. I know it's not quite that simple. It's much more painful than that in terms of just walking into a room. But there isn't, I don't think it will achieve parity, because I don't think we've achieved parity across many, many different dimensions, but there is so much room for growth, which will be for the benefit of the entrepreneurs, it'll be for the benefit of the early stage funders and the benefit for all of us in terms of businesses that we will grow.
I think this has been quite a hard podcast because it is really important to set the stage in terms of the state, but that is a historical view, and I think there is so much to be excited about because, as Jodie was saying, we are seeing record numbers of women starting businesses. We are seeing, and I see, this incredible female investor group as part of our community who are so energetic, so smart, so driven, and they are almost at the point where they are going to step up and start running this industry. We are seeing amazing funds being set up by female investors who are controlling large amounts of capital, and we are seeing female founders scaling and growing businesses. So in Europe, there have been 2 unicorns this year. One of them is a company called Pigment out of France, which is trying to build the new Excel, and it's a female founder, and it's $1 billion company, and that was one of 2 this year, that is 50% of the unicorns this year. Like, it's happening, and there's so much energy on the individual stage that is awesome, but things take time if we're not all focused on it, and I think there's still more we can do, and there's my hope is that in 10 years' time my company doesn't need to exist, because we're at a point where it's relatively more equal, but let's see.
There's a lot of talk about women, but there are also do you see layers of inequality within that? I think Annie spoke at the beginning about black women finding it even harder to get funding, women with disabilities. Is that something that you focus on, or do you think?
We're really going back down, aren't we?
Sorry, maybe we edit that into a different bit.
It's so bad. It's so bad. I heard a stat that as a black founder, male or female, you're more likely to get cancer than to get VC funding. It is the statistics around intersectional founders are horrible, and anything that I was actually talking to someone yesterday who's setting up a fund for social mobility, because even if you look at the backgrounds, while you look at women in the industry and then you look at where they've come from, it's all very similar. There is so much work to be done on that, but the benefits of it are the same, if not more, in terms of the diversity of companies and thoughts and ideas and products. I focus on women currently because there's so much that needs to change that you kind of have to niche in to not cry. But we are very thoughtful about how we construct our community, who we put on stage, and the organizations that we work with as well, because at the end of the day we're kind of all after the same thing with different challenges within. And then the other thing that we do quite a lot is just highlight the intersectional challenges are just huge, and I think just people understanding that there's layers and layers and layers of challenges that fall under that is an important part of it. So I don't know what more to say about that.
No, and this probably isn't answering a question, it's just something around female funds. They have the opportunity to drive a difference in a much quicker way than some longer standing funds, because they're likely to be more recently founded and they're likely to be reflecting more of what's important today than yesterday, and therefore that might help drive some of the change. But I agree, if you start looking further down the diversity challenge, it gets harder, not easier.
We've got 2 last questions for you. The first one is around advice for female founders or anyone struggling with funding for resources and support. What would your advice be? Where can they go?
So I think that there are 2 things to think about. One is build your network of female or similar types of founders, because networks are so important and they really amplify what you're doing, who you can ask and who you can gain knowledge from. The second is, if you're a very, very early stage company, start with angel investors and start with angel investors that you know, or if you're building in a specific industry, go and find the richest people in that industry, knock down their door, say, we're building something to disrupt your industry, I think you'll be interested. And then, because they will both be money, but they'll also be advice and support. And I think don't be afraid to knock down people. Don't just go and look for angel investors. Go and find the most valuable people for your business, knock on their door, don't take no. And then in terms of the next stage, which is the venture capital funding, I'm always very happy for people to reach out to me, because I have a network of 750 female investors across Europe. But just be very thoughtful about who you approach. Make sure you understand the stage they're investing, the sector they're investing, and then go on their team page and see if they've got any female and diverse founders and investors, and reach out to them, because that is just a better path. and then always ask if it's not for them to introduce you to other people, because I think venture is incredibly collaborative. We don't want anyone to fail, and so asking for those connections, network, I think is going to be really important.
Well, to finish, which I think we've reached time, we always go back to the big question of the day. And so today's big question, how do we close the funding gap?
So I would go back to the point we discussed earlier in terms of intervention and intervention from government, which probably isn't going to be particularly forthcoming in the next couple of months, but looking at how we really hold the industry to account. Whether I actually don't think it's a carrot or a stick. I think it is both, because it will have the benefits, holding the industry to account in terms of its investment. And we also have early stage funders in terms of VC funding, but a lot of large corporates also run their own accelerator programs, their investment programs, and for our large corporates, we know that they have got significant reporting requirements in terms of double materiality, how they're making both their financial benefits and also their impact on the world. And this is an opportunity for them to actually think about how they invest in their own ventures and accelerators.
Yeah, I think that will be such a big unlock. And the only thing I would add is, encouraging more women to become angel investors, supporting more women to make decision-making roles within funds, which is what I hope we're doing, and then proliferation of women starting their own funds and having more of a direction of capital that way.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much. That was great.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Cheers, thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Green Room by Deloitte. We release a new episode every other Tuesday with another big question. So don't forget to hit follow or subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening or watching. That way you'll be alerted whenever a new episode drops. This podcast is produced by our very own pod squad and hosted by Lizzie Elston, Ethan Worth and Annie Wong. Original music by Ali Barrett.